Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again with Ronnie Feldman for another episode of Creativity and Compliance. Welcome back, Ronnie.
Hey, it's good to be here. Hello, everybody.
Ronnie, one of the phrases that I think many compliance professionals are aware of, something that we talk about from time to time, but we've never talked about on this podcast, is nudges.
Yeah.
Could we maybe start off by you giving us your definition or your view of what is a nudge?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. You know, nudge learning in the corporate education space has been around for a while. And I think even compliance has understood the benefits of this, but we haven't really gotten into the why of it. Nudge learning, a positive reinforcement or a gentle push or a little guidance in the right direction. So it's a way to influence behavior and decision making. It gives people the opportunity to learn and to do the right thing. I want to break this down a couple of different ways, but I want to make the argument that compliance, as we typically do it, tends to be a culture of training and not so much a culture of learning. And it also tends to, we don't focus enough on having a culture that focuses on culture, if that makes sense. So I want to talk about this in a couple of different ways. Nudge learning as a way to extend a learning, so not just training people, but actually helping them learn and then extending that learning, but also as a way to influence the culture outside of training, if that makes sense. And nudges can work to support both of those initiatives. Does that make sense?
It does, but here's the question I want to pose to you, and I will use the following example. One of my favorite nudges in compliance is when you have to fill out your employee expense reimbursement request, and they move the signature from the bottom of the form to the top of the form.
Oh, sure. And
that, for some reason, nudges people after they've signed that attesting everything following is true and correct is, guess I ought to make it true and correct, rather than having it at the end. So I get that and I understand that, but I want you to explain to me how we move that concept into training.
Well, that's an interesting one. That actually touches on a previous podcast we did, which is sort of pattern disruption too, about sort of changing the order of things so things stand out and people notice it a little bit, while also being a nudge. These things are related. So let's think of it this way. Let's talk about it in terms of a learning environment. You've heard of the forgetting curve. I think I haven't talked about it in a while. I might be saying the phrase wrong. No, it's forgetting curve. Yeah, 87% of corporate learning is lost in the first month, and it continues over time, right? Even if your training is good, and we know that most compliance training is not particularly good, but even if it's really good and interesting and thoughtful and concise and has some entertainment value, you still need to reinforce that over time. So if you're in a training mindset, I would say, first you want that training to be focused on what people need to do differently versus pushing policies. And then you need to reinforce that over time. So the nudges in that sense are the little communications, the little reminders, the little reinforcements. These can be pushes, meaning like the email, the post on the newsletter, your social media, Teams chat or Slack, or any of those things. Those are the post and push, little reinforcements to remind people about the thing that they learned and to show them where other resources are. But there's also, we've talked about the idea of commercials. So commercials are things that pop up. You have a leader play a little video. You have a commercial for Speak Up that shows up in your sales training. So the point is to extend learning and recall by nudging people about the very important thing more than once a year. We haven't done this stat in a while. This is probably stats 2-3 years old. ECI put out a stat that said that how often do companies do speak up training? And it's 87% do it once a year, or less. And you're like, how do you change behavior if you're only doing something once a year? So it just makes perfect sense that we need to, particularly when you have important learning, you need to reinforce that over time. And the best way to do that is something that's really short, and gets at the essence. If there's a tagline or a main phrase you want them to learn, just something that kind of nudges them to go, hey, remember, this is still important, this is still important, this is still important. And then make it really easy for them to go and find the information, in a just-in-time theory when they need to have it. Go ahead. There's another aspect of this, but that's the training mindset, the training and learning mindset.
So you could actually nudge someone to taking the right step or doing the right thing, but you could also influence them to seeking help or guidance.
That's right. That's right. Well, and that starts to get into, I would say, the second part of it. Because, the first part of it might be like, hey, records retention, you took that as part of your code training once a year or every other year, and then they're like, everybody's hoarding emails because they're not holding on to the record retention policy or whatever. So that's a specific policy that could benefit from a couple times a year reinforcement. But what you brought up, which is what I really want to get into, is the idea of trying to make compliance a culture of influencing the culture. And I want to read something to you. It says, nudges are effective because they exploit important features of how our minds work. We often rely on automatic default thinking. So there's rational step-by-step kind of thinking, like how you solve problems, how you do a math problem, how you might logic something through, calculating cost and benefits. But when it comes to ethical behavior, we know that knowing the thing doesn't necessarily mean that you will act a certain way, because there's other things at play. We have self-control problems. We look for immediate gratification, so sometimes we do the wrong thing because the right thing is a little harder to do and the benefits are more intangible. Or you've heard me talk about this one, sometimes we do the wrong thing because I've been good, I just deserve something bad, is sort of a psychological reason why someone who knows the rules, who's passed the test, might do the wrong thing. So the idea of nudging people about good behavior is important, because we need to slowly build the muscle that we're the kind of company that does things the right way. And there's something called effective frequency. Advertisers know this. There's, you need to see a message, whatever the number is, 5, 6, 7, 8 times before it'll sink in and take action. So the idea of nudges also are a way to slowly influence the environment. We need to get enough people going, we're not the kind of company that does, that cheats on our expense report. When someone does something wrong, you need people to start standing up for each other. This is not something that's inherent to everybody. So you need to influence more people over time that hey, I like working for an ethical company. I'm going to do my part in it. So like the example you did about signing your expense report thing, those little things are all about little subtle influences, little subtle nudges, is about where you are supported. We don't tolerate bad behavior. There's lots of ways to speak up that are safe, and you can choose to be anonymous. Here's where they are. All of those messages, we want to say them as often as possible in interesting ways, so that those nudges start to impact, the culture. So this is when I talk about having ethics compliance, focusing on a culture of influencing the culture. Nudges are a great way to do that.
Ronnie, can nudges be done in a way that are almost unconscious, or people don't really think they're being nudged?
Well, totally. I mean, ultimately it is unconscious, right? Because again, we all think we have integrity, yet bad behavior, continues to happen. And again, it's because we focus on a training mindset. Pass the test, got to show 100% completion rates, which has very little to do with actually how people behave. Either I need to make learning more efficient and effective and reinforce that over time, and we need to promote the support system over time. Oh, and the other part is really spending a lot of time influencing leaders. right? Because we know leaders have a big influence. So nudging leaders as well as nudging employees. So nudging leaders about their additional responsibilities. Ultimately, it's all unconscious. What was that study? I haven't talked about it in a while. The Newcastle Honesty Box study. Do you remember this one?
No.
I probably talked about it when I first met you, when we first started doing this podcast. Newcastle University, they had a free coffee service, and they said, pay what you want. Like it was a volunteer, you can pay for the coffee. And the only thing they changed was the pictures behind the coffee, on the wall behind the coffee, and they measured whether people paid or didn't pay based on what pictures were behind the coffee. And they showed like a pretty big zigzag curve, and people mostly didn't pay when it was pictures of like landscapes or clouds or, floral arrangements, stuff like that. But there was a spike in increased payment when there was pictures of two different things. What do you think they were?
Ice cream and brownies.
No, pictures of faces and eyes. So they felt subtly watched. So they all of a sudden felt like, oh, I better be on favor. Isn't it interesting? Like, and that's totally unconscious.
Wow, that is. So very cool.
I don't love the idea of like people feeling like they're watched in compliance, just to be clear. But there is something to that, like, knowing that there's lots of checks and balances. So if you're going to do bad things, like it's going to get, noticed. That's okay. But mostly it's about the positive reinforcement. We do things the right way. You can be a part of it. Support your teammates. Be an ally. I think all of those kinds of things are the nudges that I'm talking about that we want to put out there more frequently.
Well, cool. Well, Ronnie, I think we're at the end of our time for this episode, so I can't wait to see what we come up with for next time.
All right. Nudge, nudge, everybody.